The legislative process. So a bill is a proposed piece of legislation, and every bill must be approved by both houses, the House and the Senate, in identical form. There are 5 basic steps. The introduction is when a member of the House or Senate formally proposes a bill. Committee review is when subgroups within the House and Senate review the bill. Then House and Senate approval occurs when, if the bill makes it out of a committee, a majority of the House and Senate approve of it. The second to last step is conference committee reconciliation. The conference committee reconciles the bill when different versions have passed the House and the Senate. Last, you have presidential approval. If the president signs the bill, it becomes law. If the president vetoes it, 2/3 of the House and Senate must override the veto for the bill to become law. One of the major players in this process is the Speaker of the House. The current Speaker of the House is Nancy Pelosi, pictured here. The Speaker of the House is the leader of the House of Representatives. She is chosen by the majority party and serves as the presiding officer and manager of the House. She chairs floor debates, makes majority party committee assignments, assigns members to the Rules Committee, negotiates with the minority party and the White House, guides legislation through the House, and is the leader of his or her party in the House and is expected to help party members get reelected. The Vice President serves as President of the Senate, according to the Constitution, but in practice rarely presides over its meetings. Her only real power is to break tie votes. The current Vice President is pictured here, Kamala Harris. The Senate Majority Leader is Chuck Schumer at the moment. The Senate Majority Leader is the most powerful position in the Senate. He manages the legislative process, schedules debate on legislation in consultation with the Senate Minority Leader, and acts as the spokesman for the majority party in the Senate. The first step in the legislative process is introducing a bill. In the House, a member's staff writes a bill, and the member introduces it by placing it in a wooden box called the hopper on a desk at the front of the chamber. It is referred to as HR and the order in which it was introduced in that legislative session. So, for example, HR 207. In the Senate, a bill can be introduced by a senator in a speech, by submitting a written draft to the Senate clerk, or by introducing an amendment to other legislation. It is referred to as S and the order in which it was introduced in the legislative session, for example, S 711. The second step in the legislative process is the committee. The bill is read into the congressional record and assigned to a committee. Members of the majority party are the majority of each committee and subcommittee. Party members in each chamber decide the members' committee and subcommittee assignments. Committee chairs are often chosen by seniority. The member with the longest continuous tenure on a standing committee receives preference. Chairs are chosen by a secret ballot, and committee chairs run committee meetings and control the flow of work. Standing committees are permanent committees with a defined legislative jurisdiction. The House has 20, the Senate has 21. Some examples are the House Appropriations Committee and the Senate Armed Services Committee. Select committees are specially created to consider a specific policy issue or address a specific concern. The House has 101 subcommittees, the Senate has 68. Typically, these handle specific areas of a standing committee's jurisdiction. For example, the House Energy and Commerce Committee has 6 subcommittees that handle specific bills. Here you see a list of standing and permanent select committees in the House of Representatives and in the Senate. What committees and subcommittees do. Agency review is when a committee or subcommittee asks executive agencies that would administer a law for written comments on a bill. Hearings are sessions held to gather information and views from experts, interest groups, concerned citizens, and policy experts. Markup is when the committee marks up a bill with suggested changes and amendments for the full chamber to consider. A report is when a committee issues a report to the full chamber explaining the bill and its intent. Most bills die in committee. The committee never considers them for lack of time or decides not to forward the bill to the full chamber. In the House, a discharge petition can extract a bill from a committee for consideration in the full House. This requires 218 votes. The Rules Committee is one of the most important committees in the House. After bills make it out of a committee, the Rules Committee decides the length of debate and the scope of amendments that will be allowed on a bill, setting the structure for the debate in the House. The third step in the legislative process is debate on the House and Senate floor. After bills make it out of committee, the Rules Committee decides the length of debate and the scope of amendments that will be allowed on a bill, setting the structure for the debate in the House. In the Senate, the terms of debate are agreed to through unanimous consent. The fourth step in the legislative process is the Conference Committee. So a Conference Committee reconciles the House and Senate versions of a bill. The Conference Committee's version must then pass both houses. The fifth step in the legislative process is presidential action. There are three possible actions: sign the bill, in which case it becomes law; do nothing, in which case it becomes law after 10 days if Congress is still in session. If Congress is adjourned, the bill dies. This is called a pocket veto. Last, the President can veto the bill, returning it to Congress with a message explaining why it should not become law. Congress can override this veto with a 2/3 vote in both houses. There are some differences between the legislative process in the House and Senate. In the House, a bill is introduced by a member placing the bill in the hopper. In the Senate, the bill is introduced by any member in various ways. In the House, the Rules Committee schedules debate on the House floor and establishes rules for amendments. In the Senate, unanimous consent agreements determine the rules for debate and amendments. In the House, a rule bars non-germane amendments. In other words, amendments that have nothing to do with the bill are barred. In the Senate, there is no rule banning non-germane amendments. A senator can offer an amendment to the bill that has nothing to do with the topic of the bill itself. The House does not allow filibusters, and the Senate does allow filibusters. The House has a discharge petition that can be used to extract a bill from a committee. The Senate does not allow discharge petitions. Now for a little bit about the filibuster. A filibuster is a political strategy in which a senator speaks or threatens to speak for hours on end to delay efforts to vote for a bill. A senator, once recognized on the floor, may speak on any issue without being impeded by anyone. The word filibuster is derived from a Dutch word for freebooter and the Spanish filibusteros, which describe the pirates then raiding Caribbean islands, and the term filibuster began appearing in American legislative debates in the 1850s. Actor James Stewart made the filibuster famous in the 1939 film Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. In the movie, Stewart plays a young senator who talks for nearly 24 hours to delay a vote on a corrupt public works bill. In 1957, Senator Strom Thurmond, a Democrat from South Carolina, spoke for 24 hours and 18 minutes in an attempt to block passage of the 1957 Civil Rights Act. A senator's right to speak endlessly on the Senate floor dates to Vice President Aaron Burr, who declared in 1805 that the Senate should not be burdened by too many procedural rules. A process to end debate on legislation known as the previous question motion was dropped in 1806. The first successful filibuster was recorded in 1837, when a group of senators who opposed President Andrew Jackson filibustered to prevent Jackson's allies from expunging a resolution of censure against him. In the 1800s, various senators tried unsuccessfully, multiple times, to abolish the filibuster. Finally, in 1917, President Woodrow Wilson urged change after Senate filibusters blocked his push to arm merchant ships against German U-boats during the run-up to World War I, or during the run-up to American participation in World War I. Rule 22 authorized a two-thirds vote to invoke cloture, or official closure to debate. Upon the vote of a supermajority of senators, the rule limits consideration of a pending matter to a final 30 more hours of debate. Rule 22 was first successfully applied in 1919 when the Senate invoked cloture to halt a filibuster against the Treaty of Versailles, which officially ended World War I. Even with the new cloture rule, filibusters remained an effective means to block legislation, since achieving a two-thirds vote is difficult. Over the next 4 decades, the Senate managed to invoke cloture only 5 times. Filibusters proved to be particularly useful to Southern senators who sought to block civil rights legislation, including anti-lynching bills. Not until 1964 did the Senate successfully overcome a filibuster to pass a major civil rights bill. In the early 1970s, Senate leaders adopted changes that allowed more than one bill or matter to be pending on the floor at once. Now, leadership can simply set aside a controversial bill as theoretical debate continues and moves on to other matters. By 1975, rules were further changed to make it easier to invoke cloture, requiring just a 3/5 majority vote to end a filibuster, or 60 votes. However, 41 senators can indefinitely block a bill by refusing to end theoretical debate or vote for cloture. Filibusters have become so ingrained within the Senate's process that new bills generally do not go to vote unless the leadership is assured they have at least 60 votes. The prospect of a filibuster can hold up a final vote or force a bill's supporters to make changes in a bill. While the filibuster remains very much alive in its current form, endless performances by long-winded senators are now mostly limited to the movies and history books. In the 1990s and 2000s, senators turned to the filibuster more frequently in an effort to thwart the majority party. According to research by UCLA political scientist Barbara Sinclair, there was an average of 1 filibuster per Congress during the 1950s. That number grew steadily since and spiked in 2007 and 2008 when there were 52 filibusters. By the time the 111th Congress adjourned in 2010, the number of filibusters had risen to 137 for the entire 2-year term. This chart shows the rise of the use of the threat of the filibuster to stop legislation, peaking at 263 in 2020, the most recent year for which I have data. Today, filibusters remain a part of Senate practice, although only on ordinary legislation. The filibuster can no longer be used in blocking executive and judicial branch nominees. The Senate adopted new precedents in the 2010s to allow a simple majority to end debate on nominations. In 2013, then Majority Leader Harry Reid of Nevada, a Democrat, called for the nuclear option, which was the end of the filibuster. This changed the rules so that all executive branch, cabinet appointments, and judicial nominations below the Supreme Court could proceed with a simple majority of 51 votes. In 2017, then Majority Leader Mitch McConnell changed the rules again to allow a simple majority of 51 votes to invoke cloture and end debate on Supreme Court nominations.